Kinsman, and I'm here to talk about sustainability. It's a word so many people are using now. Everyone's joining the conversation, which is great. But what does it actually mean? Well, as a journalist and a consultant, I really do try and think deeply about what does sustainability mean to all of us. You know, however you define it, for me, it usually involves thinking more deeply and striving to make better choices. There is an official definition given by Harlem Brundtland in 1987 when she was Prime Minister of Norway, and it's development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. What does it mean to you? Isn't it really just, is it about sustaining things as they are, or isn't it about thinking about the future and trying to shape a better future? I think aiming for that is about making better decisions as consumers, as employees, as employers. And so for me, it's really just thinking about how am I having, or are we having, a positive impact? It's about whenever we're at a decision-making crossroads, how can we be more thoughtful about how we spend our money? Where can we spark change for the better? For people, for planet, for today, and for tomorrow. You know, we cannot predict the future. We can't, but we can make better choices. And so when I'm at this sort of mythical crossroads, I envisage this signpost. And it's there, and I think it's telling me, will this action in some way do good for the environment? Will it lead to positive social impact? Is it going to somehow help a community in need economically? You know, I don't really use apps that much apart from the obvious ones. I do love maps and I love route planners. So imagine, wouldn't it be great if we had this app that helped us plan every single one of our next step forward? So they were the best one, the best next step forward. You know, that's this app I'm visualizing. It's navigating us just to do the right thing. So imagine we kind of do have an app for that. You know, it's our own minds. It's free. It's really often the most trustworthy reference of all. It's not about deferring to AI, artificial intelligence all the time. It's about using our own actual intelligence. But before we try and figure out how this app's going to work, maybe I should give you a little bit of a background on why I'm here talking to you about sustainability. How did I get into this? You know, it was simply how I was brought up. Teenage years, growing up with grandparents, I can tell you, it does that to you. It doesn't help with your street cred. I could have done without my grandfather having to pick me up in his brown Rover from parties. I don't think he ever left third gear. But what my grandparents did teach me is about living life more simply, in a more traditional way. About not wasting things. It was just their normal way of being. So my grandfather, he was from the north of England, he was a scientist. He was an electrical engineer, and he looked at every product, purchase or process through the eyes of a scientist. And actually, contrary to how that might sound, it meant he really was always thinking, how are us humans impacting on nature? Rewind a decade, my childhood, it's the 80s. I'm living in New York City, surely the world capital of fast living, consumption. And you know, that was a time and a place where anything you wanted, it's for sale. That I get attitude, you know, shampoo ads, credit card campaigns, they're all telling us then and probably still now, go on, treat yourself, you're worth it. Happiness is only ever a retail therapy skip away. But the penny kind of drops when you think about this collective appetite for stuff. That's kind of what's getting us deeper into this mess. Let's have a history lesson together, okay? Let's cast our minds back to 1760. So it's the first industrial revolution, and coal power is happening. It's firing us up. At that point, the whole world's population is 700 million, which sounds a lot, until you fast forward to today, when you know we're at almost 8 billion. So let's move from the 18th century to the 19th century, when the second industrial revolution got going full throttle. We are really tucking into those natural resources now. We are spewing out those carbon emissions. And, you know, also around that time, as we move into the sort of 20th century, us human beings, we suddenly have a lot more finances. We're able to travel for leisure And boy, do we have an appetite for stuff and consumerism. Something else about this time, in our little imaginary timeline. Well, I'm going to ask you, when do you think the first electric car was invented? It was actually 1890 in Iowa, that far back. But it wouldn't be for another century until it became a truly accessible mode of transport. How can that be? You know, also on this timeline, it's a shame. Because as far back as 1937, we were already thinking about what we're talking about now as sustainability. 1937, professor at University of Wisconsin, he's already noticing a heating up of the earth. You know what he calls it? The greenhouse effect. So talking about all things eco, it isn't really something so new. I'm just hoping that today, now that we're all having more conversations around it, we can encourage each other through conversation and swapping ideas. As travellers, hotel owners, members of the media, let's all just think more deeply about what being eco really means and trying to understand how all of our choices can really have positive or negative impacts. You're familiar with the slow food movement, that concept, right? So look at that model. It's all about celebrating local and seasonal, buying from small producers, honourable, responsible supply chains, where people are paid properly. And people are rewarded for their ethical practices. And as a result, we all enjoy much more nutritious and flavoursome experiences, better for our health and that of the world. What a great model. Just as we've woken up to the harms of industrial agriculture, international freighting, and the destructive nature of fast fashion, with its toxic dyes, its resource guzzling, its cheap labour, its human rights abuses, it's time to get our head around the same values in travel and the hospitality industry. So just as the places we visit, the destinations we go to, reflect our own curiosity, everything that we do reflects our values and our hopes for the future. I really genuinely think if people thought more about how all of our consumer choices were impacting other people and the planet, and how we can all affect the greater good, the well-being of the world, I think we'd all want to do the right thing. So looking to the future, what can be our intentions? What resolutions can we set? Well, I've been a journalist for 2.5 decades. So most of this time has been spent, writing about amazing hotels, luxury travel, and as much as I've loved all the treats in these 5-star stays, excess and indulgence has never really sat right with me. As dreamy as it was to be able to call flying around the world my job, work, there was always a nagging guilt. And then everything changed. We stopped travelling. And we got the chance, an opportunity, to think about what that means. And now we really do, we have a chance to shape the future and do things differently. I think it's sustainability is complex and nuanced, but I think this is quite simple. We need to live more slowly, more simply, and better in tune with nature. One great thing any of us can do, as individuals, as governments, as businesses, is we can leave more money in local communities. A powerful way to genuinely make travel a force for good, which is fast becoming a cliche, but let's look at that expression. It's about people travelling from well-off places or people who have lots of money going off to other places which don't have as much money and leaving more money in the right hands. Just think of all those tourism businesses and travellers who could help this communitarianism. Think global, act local. Go to little stalls instead of big supermarkets. Don't go to big famous brands. Go to small individual makers. These cash-dependent economies are devastated by the disappearance of tourism income. So there's a term in economics, it's called leakage. It's about when businesses operate in a way where they take as much profit and revenue away from their localized businesses and they divert it all back to other bank accounts. What we want to do is not be diverting this money from local communities to international far-flung bank accounts, but leaving as much money as we can in local pockets. That's sustainability. We could all and should all be more minimalistic. We all know reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Whether it's when it comes to our toiletry bags or all the things that we're consuming, it's about quality over quantity. It's about eliminating all that stuff from our lives. Maybe it's our hotel rooms. Maybe it's if we work in the hotel industry, maybe it's from our supply chains. Yes, it's disposing of disposability. You know, we all have to refill our water bottles. We know that. Our coffee cups. We shouldn't be using those mini plastic toiletry that we see in bathrooms. But you know what we should also be doing? Bypassing the bioplastics and the compostable solutions. We need to get rid of anything single use because, you know, chances are that packaging labelled green, it still required the use of petrochemicals to be made. It's the manufacturing, but also the distribution of it. And if it's not disposed of in the right way, you know, that stuff, it doesn't end up biodegrading anyway. We should probably avoid so many chemicals. Harsh chemicals are around us more than ever before. They're harmful for our own physical and cognitive health. They wreak havoc with natural ecosystems. We're absorbing them from our food systems, our toiletries, our environments, and more disinfectants in circulation than ever. Yes, we need them to keep us safe, but imagine breathing in all these invisible traces of carcinogenic cleaning products. Just try and visualize all these pesticides, these fungicides, these insecticides used, well, in so many ways, but industrial agriculture. It sort of makes you understand why people choose organic, vegan, biodynamic menus, right? Something that's kind of massive. Cutting down on carbon. We need to cut down on carbon. We know that. Obviously, that's key. So hopefully you were paying a bit of attention at school when you talked about the carbon cycle, and you remember, and you can probably explain the carbon cycle better than me. But, you know, there's the decomposition over millennia of organic matter, which creates fossil fuels. And it's the burning of that to fire our concrete, propel our planes, and it's the chopping down of wood also that is releasing CO2 into the atmosphere, which is creating this blanket around the world, which is heating us up. So we need to reduce that, obviously. So if we look at everything through a carbon lowering lens, we may want to prioritize things such as, I don't know, plant-based eating, sure, and always using renewable energy ourselves in our homes and if we're in charge of businesses, and absolutely minimizing our flying and looking at, well, choices, looking at which aviation providers we're choosing and who invests in renewables and all of that. But I saw a tweet recently which really resonated with me. And it said, you know what, it's less about the likes of us going vegan, it's more about the 100 corporations in the world responsible for 71% of emissions. So that means us not just making better choices, but also lobbying for the protection of nature in every way we can. I recently interviewed Tika Minami of Greenpeace in Brazil. She works with forest communities on the front line in the fight against deforestation in Brazil. She said to me, if we protect nature, it will protect us. Indigenous people are actually stewards of 65% of the Earth's land, and that hosts 80% of the world's biodiversity. That's a healthy ecosystem. We need biodiversity. Indigenous people hold so much wisdom, and yet they're the most vulnerable. If we consider climate and the climate emergency the biggest threat to us all corners of the world being heated up, the health of every forest impacts everyone. We need to give land back, to decarbonise, and we need to learn from the wisdom of the indigenous people, quite simply, in a nutshell, by living in better balance with nature. But if we stop and think about the long-term ways to help our world, you know, sustainability is not just about cultivating solutions and innovating. It's also about population control, throwing that curveball in there. You know, while it might not seem obvious, a big priority, it's helping young women complete their studies. I made a documentary about this called Changing Worlds in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. But it's not just me saying this. United Nations says the same thing. So how does educating young women and girls in remote rural areas help? This is where sustainability is complex, and we need to sort of understand everything. It's a history lesson, sociology lesson, science lesson. You know, it means marriage comes later, so fewer, healthier children are born. This reduces demand on the world's natural resources. Equality in society is improved. That means women can contribute better to the economy themselves and the further education of yet more girls is encouraged. I'm not here to lecture you. I'm not here to lecture people. I'm just here to share stories. Because I think that the key to progress is more open, honest, two-way conversations, idea swapping, more storytelling amongst all of us about the behind-the-scenes stuff going on. Anything that helps us understand why some choices are better than others. It's about understanding the bigger picture and always not just thinking about our own negative impact and how we can reduce that. Yes, we know plastic straws are bad. Yes, we know small plastic bottles, particularly some types of plastic, are bad. They must go. But we really, really need to think more about how we can improve our positive impact, to have a truly positive legacy. Buckminster Fuller, an architect and system theorist in the early 20th century. His words, wow, they're totally relevant today. He said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Let's just keep thinking about the bigger picture. I don't have the answers. Maybe you do. Maybe you do. I think all we can do is strive to make better decisions so our choices lead to more positive change.